Hi, welcome to Cards by Kendra. This is a celebration hop for Catherine Kelly, the founder of Team Tiny. She has reached 1,000 subscribers. This hop is hashtag driven. The hashtag that appears in the title for each video can be activated to provide a complete list of this hop's participants. Please take the time to stop at each of the talented participants on the hop, leave a comment at each stop, and please consider subscribing. The more channels you leave comments on, the more chances you have to win from the many prizes available. Some prizes may only be available to continental U.S. residents, so please include your country in your comment. Also, you must be a subscriber of Catherine Kelly's channel to be eligible to win, so don't forget to subscribe to her channel. Since you're here at my channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button down below. All the details listing the requirements and prizes available will be listed in the drop-down box below. The card I'm going to be sharing with you today is an interactive Father's Day card that features a sliding rocket and moon from Simon Hurley Creates Space Training Stamp Set with a galaxy background made with distress oxide inks. This card was inspired by Catherine Kelly's Coffee Rocket card with galaxy background. The link to her video is in the description box below. To start, I'm using Distress Oxide inks and blending them onto Stark White cardstock by Simon Hurley using Picket Fence's life-changing blender brushes. I'm just dabbing it off on my microfiber towel in between each color. I started with Candied Apple and then Dusty Concord and then Mermaid Lagoon. Now I didn't have Blueprint Sketch in Distress Oxide ink, just regular Distress ink. And I noticed that it didn't blend as well as the Oxide inks. So I'll be going over that with a different color in just a moment. Next, I'm adding Twisted Citron, and then squeezed lemonade. I decided to go over the Blueprint Sketch with Faded Jeans Distress Oxide ink, and I accidentally bumped the camera, so sorry about that. Now I'm misting this with water with my Distress sprayer. As Catherine would explain it, it leaves a mottled, dotted watercolor look. Now I'm adding in the black soot. I'm adding this a little bit darker in some areas and a little bit lighter in other areas. As Catherine would say, just to give it that nebula sort of galaxy look. The more layers you add to the card, the better, the more interesting even if it's barely visible. It gives your eyes something to look at without even realizing that the extra layer of complication is there. I think my hand was a little heavier than what Catherine's card was because it's almost black, but I think it's starting to look like a galaxy. Next, I sprayed it with water again and some of the colors started coming through the black. I kept adding water and patting it dry with a paper towel until I was happy with it. Now I'm adding Dylusion's Ink Shimmer Spray in white linen color. As Catherine would say, it's like a party in a bottle. But rather than spraying the shimmer spray, I'm applying directly to my glass mat with the end of the sprayer, and I'm using a paintbrush to flick the specks of white shimmer onto the background. They were really tiny at first, which is difficult to see on camera, but when I added water to it, the flecks got bigger and gave me more of the look I was going for. The stamp set I'm using is the Space Training Stamp Set from Simon Hurley Create. I'm taking a piece of stark white cardstock and rubbing off the excess black soot from my blender brush on the bottom area so that I can stamp the moon over a grayish background. Now I'm taking a few of the stamps from this set and placing them on my stamping platform, which is a stamparatus from Stampin Up. It's similar to the Misty. Before inking up the stamps, I'm rubbing the embossing buddy over the cardstock. I'm using Ranger archival ink because it stays wet long enough for me to add a coat of clear embossing powder to the stamped images. I'm flicking off the excess powder and adding more powder to the areas that I noticed that didn't get coated very well. And now I am going to apply my heat gun. I'm taking the stamp that says "I love you to the moon and back" from that same stamp set, and I've placed it on an acrylic block. I'm using a scrap strip of black cardstock, and I'm inking the stamp with Versamark clear embossing ink. For the first stamp, I forgot to rub the embossing buddy on the left-hand side of the strip, but I remembered to do it for the other side. I'm glad I did because it shows the difference on what happens once you apply white embossing powder. I don't know if you can see this in the video or not, but there's a lot of excess powder that has to be brushed off with a paintbrush on the left-hand side. There's only a few spots that needed touching up on the right-hand side. Next, I applied the heat gun. I like to use my long tweezers so I don't burn my fingers. Now for the coloring. I'm using Copic markers, and the colors I'm using are listed in the description box below. I'm starting off with 3 different shades of blue: B28, B23, and B63. For the reds, I'm using R46, R29, and R14. While I'm coloring, I wanted to mention that Catherine donates a substantial number of her cards to kids and seniors in need. Since I have a lot of cards that I've made over the past 5 years, I'll be sending some of them to add to her donation pile. Now for the yellows, I'm using Y18, Y02, and for the oranges, I'm using YR04 and YR15. For the gray areas, I'm using N0. I used a 1-inch circle punch to cut out the moon. It was just the right size. And then I fussy cut out the rocket. I'll spare you the boring details of that. Next, I took a Copic marker, a black one, and ran it along the edges to get rid of the white. I cut the sentiment in half at an angle, and of course using the one on the right because it turned out better. Now I'm taking my paper trimmer and I'm cutting some 1/4-inch wide strips from a scrap piece of bluish purple shimmer cardstock. I'm using this cardstock to cut out the Lawn Fawn word die strip that says Happy Father's Day. I put a strip of Sizzix adhesive paper on the back before die cutting it with my Big Shot, since the letters are really thin. This will make it easier to adhere to the card later rather than trying to put glue on the back. I didn't have enough of this cardstock for a frame, so I'm using the strips to make one. I cut 2 at 4 1/4 inches long and 2 at 5 1/2. Now I'm taking black and white striped washi tape like Catherine did in her video, and I'm applying it at an angle on a 1-inch wide scrap piece of white cardstock. I thought I might want to add it to the purple cardstock because it looked a little see-through, but I didn't like it. I had to line up the stripe pattern and make sure it was straight. I made sure this was long enough to fit the bottom of the 5 1/2-inch wide card. Next, I cut off the edges using my Tim Holtz 5-inch mini snips. I love these because they have a non-stick coating, allowing you to cut through products like glue dots, double stick tape, or washi tape without getting them covered in glue. Then I trimmed this piece down, accidentally cutting it at 5 1/4 inches instead of 5 1/2. But I'll show you how I fixed this in just a minute. I made this strip 3/4 inches wide. Next, I'm taking my card base and trimming off 1/2 inch off the bottom on one side. Next, I adhered the stripes to the bottom of the inside of the card and glued down the frame strips using Nouveau Deluxe adhesive. Next, I trimmed down the background, cutting off 1/8 inch from each edge. Then I realized I had to cut off 1/2 inch to match up with the bottom of the card base. I snipped off the ends of the strips that were hanging off the ends of the card. Now to make the interactive part of the card. I'm just taking all of the pieces and trying to figure out the placement of everything before I tape the die down. This is one of the shorter dies from the Leaping Slider Channels Dynamics by My Favorite Things Stamps. I used a piece of washi tape to hold the die in place and ran it through my Big Shot. I still didn't cut off enough of the background, so I had to trim it again, and I added the bottom frame strip using Nouveau Deluxe adhesive. I removed the die and kept the piece that was cut out and centered the background on the card base so I could line up where that cut piece needed to be glued down. Next, I took one of the slider elements and added little strips of 1/8 of an inch score tape to both sides. I attached one side to a 1/2 inch circle, which was placed on the back side under the background, and then I glued the other side to the rocket on top of the background. The 1/2 inch circle was made from heavyweight cardstock, by the way. Now, because the background has to be lifted up with foam tape, I didn't want the white from the card base to show around the edges of the slider cutout, so I added black Soot Distress Oxide ink around the edges. I accidentally covered up some of that pretty nebula, so I tried to wipe it off with my microfiber cloth. Now I'm attaching foam strips to the back along all of the edges and then a few places in the middle. The slider cutout was too close to the top of the card, so I couldn't use the same size foam strips I used on the other sides. I had to use a skinnier piece of foam tape that wasn't as thick as the bigger foam strips, so I had to double layer the skinny pieces of foam strips. Then I removed the backing and carefully placed it on the card base. Next, I removed the adhesive backing from the Father's Day word strip and placed that at the bottom above the peekaboo effect stripe piece. Then I added a foam square to the back of the moon and put some Nouveau adhesive on the back of the black sentiment strip and placed that above the word die cut. I had to cut off the little ends that were sticking off the edge of the card. Now, if you look at the striped peekaboo piece that I glued down to the card base, you'll notice here that I cut it too short and that was really bugging me. So I decided to take the scrap piece that was cut off and cut some little 1/4 inch strips to glue down to each edge. I used a Moon and Stars punch that I have had forever, and I cut out a few tiny stars out of that same shiny cardstock and glued a few of these down. Next, I added some tiny rhinestone stars. I added clear wink of Stella to the flames on the rocket, the dark side of the moon, and on the stars. And that finishes up my card. I hope you liked my card and found this video helpful. Don't forget, commenting on this video enters you for a chance to win the amazing prizes for the hop that are listed in the description box below. You'll find a link to all of the supplies I used today below also. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please click the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel, and be sure to subscribe to Catherine Kelly's channel to be eligible to win those prizes. Look for me on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at Cards by Kendra, and on my website, cardsbykendra.com. And have a great day!